The show starts in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Invest in Yourself, the podcast series. I'm, of course, your host with the most, Phil Better, the mogul himself, and I'm today very happy to have the alpha female herself of the Alpha Female Chronicle podcast, Linsay Philippe-Auguste. Linsay, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Linsay, I enjoyed a little talk before the show started, getting to know that you were kind of rushing to get here. So thank you so much for taking that time, rushing from your 9 to 5 to be here and take the time to let me learn about you and your podcast. I have a little, intro here, a little bio that you sent me, but I want you to introduce yourself to the audience, let them know a bit about you and why you're here.
All right. Well, my name is Linsay Philippe-Auguste. I'm in Montreal. I'm an author, I'm a content creator, and a podcast host and producer for the Alpha Female Chronicles podcast. I had the privilege of publishing my first book 2 years ago. It's a poetry collection, the Alpha Female Chronicles poetry collection. You'll see the link between the podcast and the book. I've been writing as a passion for many years now. Although I do have a 9 to 5, it's important for me to have a creative outlet, and the poetry collection allowed me to have that as well as the podcast. So, yeah.
I love that. So obviously the podcast came after the book was written.
Yes.
So was the writing the book or the reason why you wanted the podcast, or was there something more you wanted to do with that podcast? Like, why did you start your podcast?
I started my podcast to complement the poetry collection. So let me first talk about the origin story of the poetry collection.
Let's go back to the start. Let's go back to the primordial ooze, if you will, the beginning of the podcast. How or the story of you. So let's go back to the beginning.
So back in 2007, I started a blog, and that blog was called Random Thoughts of an Alpha Female. And that was a creative outlet that I used post breakup, not to get into too many details, but I kind of had been contemplating publishing a blog at the time. It was very, how can I say this? It was very trendy. Blogs were very trendy back in 2007. And I was kind of toying with the idea of creating one. And I was like, who's going to read it? Are people going to get me? Because the reason why it was called Random Thoughts of an Alpha Female is because I have a lot of random thoughts, right? So I was hesitating about like publishing, whether they were poems or any type of blog post, and to put it out there. But I summed up the courage and I started writing regularly on my blog, and it became my creative outlet. At the time, I was studying English literature at Concordia. So I was writing essays all the time, and I was kind of sick of it. I wanted to write about things that I actually cared about. So that's why the blog existed. And over the years, I published a lot of poems. So many years after that, I guess my passion for blogging, it waned a little bit, but I wanted to kind of transform it and put it on a different platform. So I decided to pick some of my favorite poems that I had published, and even some that I had never published. I decided to put them all together in a book, in a poetry collection. So I started working on that project in late 2019, not knowing that in 2020, the world would fall apart. So the book was published, it was September 2020, and during like the first phase of the pandemic, I lost my job, which was great for me because I started working on my podcast. I had a lot of time to work to plan everything out for the podcast, the first episodes, to book guests. Most of my guests are my friends, which is fine. And really, the point of the podcast was, of course, to help promote my book, but also to generate conversations. I love to have conversations with people. I love exchanging with people. I used to study in communications in CEGEP. I love journalism and I love doing interviews. So doing the podcast allowed me to combine so many passions, talking about literature, doing like literary analysis of my poems with my guests and exchanging with them and just having another point of view. And also the point of the Alpha Female Chronicles is to show different aspects of what it means to be an alpha female. I think a lot of people have a negative interpretation of what an alpha female is. I want to show like the good, the bad, and the not so cute sides of being an alpha female. The go-getter, driven, overachiever, um, imposter syndrome, anxiety attacks, all of that, all of that. And I want to discuss that with my guests. And I make sure to also have a male guests on my show, just so we can have like a full perspective of a topic and not just have the perspective of an alpha female, like having a bunch of alpha females talking about like, yes, I'm an overachiever and I love it. No, like we need to weigh like the
The yin
opinions.
and the yang
Exactly.
of it. Have that discourse because someone sees something a little different from a
Yes,
different perspective and allowing that to grow and create a better understanding. No, I love that.
absolutely. Yes, so that's how the podcast came to be. It was all thanks to the blog I created back in 2007.
So back when you started your blog, the random thoughts of an alpha female, did you have any goals? Like, did you say, "Hey, I hope to one day maybe publish in a book," or was it just like this is something I'm going to just try and see if it's a great outlet for me?
I always dreamed of being a published author, of making like writing like as a career, right? So having the blog allowed me to just write about anything and to kind of try things, right? I had never written like blog posts before. That's a different format. It's more of a free form than writing literary analysis on sonnets or doing comparative literature. It's like I'm the boss. I decide what I want to write about. You know, I'm the editor. I'm the publisher, I'm the editor, I'm the author. And to have that control, that's something that I always longed to have. I guess during that season of my life, I was trying to figure out who I was, or more to reassert who I was and to kind of celebrate all my like my flaws and everything about me, like the good and the bad. It was for me a journey in a way of self rediscovery, and to be able to have like archives of that. Sometimes I go back and read some of my old posts and I'm like, "Ooh, wow, I was going through it. Okay. I went through a lot." So that blog to me was more than just a creative outlet, but it was a platform for me to kind of expose my thoughts, and this in like in the same thing, in the same way like people were able to read and relate. And that's what I find the most gratifying, is knowing that there are readers out there, they read my stuff and they can relate. So yeah.
No, I love it. And now with the podcast, you have another level of connectivity you have
Hmm.
with them because they get to hear you dissect your own poems and get other opinions on how your pieces of art. I love that. Um, have you gotten feedback from your audience about the style of your podcast?
I have what I've gotten so far, the feedback is that it's very natural, right? It's just a conversation, and that was the
Mhm.
whole point. That was the point, having a conversation. I wanted every episode to feel like it's like you with your friends talking about something, and there's a camera and a microphone.
There's just this like a thing in front of you
Yeah.
recording everything you say, so you have to choose.
Yes.
Do you choose your words wisely or you're
Yes.
open? But that's great. With podcasting, since you're still new, but you've been in the blogging. I'm not sure if that's on my end. That beeping. Anyways, or with the blogging world, you've been there a while. If you have a tip for maybe people in the 1 to 3 year range who started podcasting, a tip maybe for them to help them grow to the next level. Do you have anything for them?
I would say to jot down all the ideas they have, whether they're good or bad, because from that list you can pick some subjects for podcast episodes. It can be about anything, and just like brainstorm, and don't be afraid to write down the most far-fetched ideas, because you can develop them afterwards, right? You just want to start with something. And I think maybe for many podcasters, the biggest challenge is just to get started. I know that was my challenge, to get started, because there can be a lot of overthinking. You want it to be perfect. You want to have the right equipment. You want to have like the best like topics. You want to have the right guests. Just start with something. Write any idea you have. Listen to other podcasts to inspire you. But I would say, like, don't overthink it. Start with one idea. It starts with one thing. And never mind if you don't have the best equipment. Like, I record my episodes on Zoom. Like, I started recording episodes during the pandemic. Like, and nobody was going nowhere. So we all had Zoom. So that's the thing. I know you can, like, as when people want to start doing a podcast, they feel like there are too many roadblocks for them to get started. And not just in terms of like resources or equipment, but it can just be about confidence as well. I know I was kind of terrified of like showing my face because I write.
Yeah,
I tried.
you have that still that anonymity because no one knows who you are. They may know your name,
Absolutely, yes,
but they don't know your face or your voice in
absolutely.
this regard.
Absolutely. So allowing myself to be even more vulnerable, because yes, when you're blogging, when you're writing, you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable to a degree. But when you're actually like on camera and people listen to your voice, you can feel self-conscious. But that shouldn't stop anyone from doing a podcast if they want to. I know it's like it can be for some the biggest hurdle to overcome, like confidence level, or just feeling like, do I have anything to say to these people out there? Like, will people care? Does my voice matter? And I think it's important to feel that yes, your voice does matter and you do have a story to tell. So we should not let these hurdles stop us from creating stuff, especially like podcasters. Like, just write down your ideas, whatever they may be, and you have a voice, and it needs to be heard.
I like that. It's great. I'm gonna definitely clip that and share that out. That's an amazing clip. Um, Editors, make sure you clip that out. Um, uh, in your journey as a podcaster, and must be interesting dissecting your own pieces of literature.
Yes, yes, it is. It's weird because I'm used to dissecting other works of literature, right? Um, so to kind of, I guess, dig deeper, because the in some way, I thought the hardest part was writing down whatever I went through. And to be honest, not everything that I wrote was like super deep. Like not everything
It
is
was
super,
deep at
super
the
deep.
moment. When I
It
wrote
was
it, it was
deep
the
at the
deepest thing.
moment. But yeah, at the moment, like writing it down, it was very cathartic for me. And then when I read it and when I have to analyze it during an episode, and like the beauty of I guess literature and also the podcast is that although like I can maybe like target one theme in a poem, guests can maybe like see something else, another theme. So to see that what I write has so many, I guess, facets that can be dissected, that's kind of cool. So but definitely it can be difficult to read some of the poems that I've written in the past, like in specific seasons of my life, and to kind of have flashbacks of what was happening and to feel these emotions once again, but with a more mature perspective. It's interesting. It's like it can be therapeutic um, in a way, um, but it's so weird to see like how much I've grown since I've written some of these poems, because the poems in my collection, they date from 2008 to I think 2018. So a span of 10 years, right? A lot of things happened in 10 years. I
Yeah, you're a
graduated
whole new person.
university.
Biologically, you're a whole new person. Every 7 years, you become a new person. So yeah.
Yeah. So the person that I was in 2007 has completely evolved into a whole new woman by the
Yeah.
time 2018 rolled is. So
A decade later, gee,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And then you're looking at it nearly half a decade later. You're looking back at it with more mature eyes than that.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, do you do you feel that your vulnerability you end up showing in the episodes, from analyzing it and kind of sharing what you were kind of going through with your guests and that, do you believe that it helps grow your show? If it shows,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I'm all about just being your authentic self unapologetically. And that was what I was trying to do with my blog, what I wanted to do with my poetry collection and the podcast. Because, and I don't want to get too deep here, but growing up, I felt that I had to fit a mold. I had to act a certain way, think a certain way, and I never felt like I would fit into that mold. So I always felt kind of odd. Like I knew I had quirks, I had passions, but I was never able to fully express myself the way that I really wanted it to, you know?
Mhm.
And having a blog, writing my poetry, and having the podcast is allowing me to just show like all all sides of who I am, you know? And sometimes, I get irritated. I'm opinionated, and I show all these aspects and I allow myself to be vulnerable and talk about maybe some of the most difficult seasons of my life, to talk about it with my guests. Um, like I mentioned, many of my guests are my friends. So some of them like have lived through these experiences with me. So they have a sense of how how I overcame some hurdles or difficulties, but I in my podcast I'm able to kind of dig in a bit deeper, and I think that's what's helping me connect with my audience.
I love that. I love that. I think it's amazing because a couple episodes ago, I had someone who was like echoing another podcaster that was echoing that vulnerability. The more he was vulnerable, he saw his numbers grow, and then I was interested to me because your podcast is a direct vulnerability. You're sharing your blog posts with the audience, the poems that you wrote when you were at your deepest, darkest moments, or even at your highest highs.
Mm.
You're sharing this, and on top of it, you're dissecting it with
Mhm.
kind of like a cold surgical analysis, if you will, with your guests,
Yeah.
be it with your friends, but they're adding this different viewpoint on it because some of them, like you said, they were going through it with you, and
Mhm.
they can collaborate or can say, "Hey, we couldn't even tell you we're going through these issues until reading this work." So yeah, it's hats off to you for being that vulnerable.
Thank
I
you. Thank
I
you.
don't think I could be that vulnerable. I'm barely vulnerable with my therapist as it is. So you going the next level is seeking discomfort on a new level. I want to know, with your episodes, with your whole show, there must have been a moment that you're like solidified. Yeah, this is why I'm podcasting.
Mhm.
Could be an audience member reaching out or something like that. Do you care to share one of those with us?
Absolutely. There's one episode where I had the privilege of having a therapist, a Black therapist, a Haitian therapist. So I'm Haitian. So to me, that was like the epitome of like, oh my gosh, like we can talk about like real things. We can dig deep. And I had one of my guests, one of my good friends, as a guest as well for that episode. And we basically got a free therapy session, and we had we got tools like we learned coping skills and coping tools, and we were discussing like I guess some of the burdens that we have as Black women, as Haitian women in like a modern world, all the challenges that we face. And I'm a big proponent of self-care, and that's something I discuss a lot in my podcast. And we were able to discuss self-care for Black women in that episode. And at the end of the episode, me and my friend, we were just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Like we felt like rejuvenated. It was amazing. And I'm so grateful for that guest. That's one of the, I guess it really is one of the highlights so far of my podcast.
I love it. No, that must have been just, first of all, getting the free service. That is just,
Yes,
that
yes,
must have been just like,
yes.
yes, like just happiness all over.
It
Cause
was great because I had been following her for a while on Instagram, and she posts like affirmations, and I was just so happy to find a Haitian therapist. I'm like, wow, okay. And she's based in Boston, so I'm sure there I'm sure there are. I'm hoping there are Haitian therapists in Montreal. But just to be able to
I'm
connect with
pretty
one,
sure. But
I
yes,
hope so. I hope so. But to be able to connect with one, and also she was able to share like some of the stuff that she went through, like you know, as a woman, like going through life and facing different kinds of challenges. So it wasn't only her telling us, so what do you think? No, no, she was sharing like some of her experiences, and this was really one of my favorite episodes so far.
I love it. I love it. Lindsay, we're coming up to the end of the episode, and these are the two last questions I always ask, and I hate coming to the end of the episode because I have to say goodbye to my guests, and I'm having such a fun time listening to your story and learning more about some of the amazing people on your podcast, because I'm gonna jump over and listen to more episodes. But I would love to know, is there a podcast that you recommend to your friends to listen to? Like if someone comes up to you, hey, I heard of this thing called podcasts. Do you have any I should listen to? Like, what's your one that you go to, or one that you like to share?
One of my favorite podcasts is Leave Your Mark by Eliza Licht. She used to work for Donna Karen when I started blogging, and she was the, I guess the face. Like she worked in PR. She was
Mm.
like senior VP of PR, and her team created this character, which was the DKNY PR girl, and she had like an avatar or whatever, and she would tweet a lot. That's when I started following her, and over the years, she released a book called Leave Your Mark, and it's very career oriented, and she talks about how she ended up working in fashion, but not just that, like she kind of details like steps to like getting ahead in your career and picking the right career. And I think it was a few years after she launched her book, she published her book, she launched her podcast. And every episode, she interviews someone in the industry and they talk about how they started their careers, every detour that they had in their careers. And basically, this podcast can help anyone who wants to transition into another career, someone who wants to kind of forge ahead in their current career and want to know how to go about it. Um, I love that podcast because of the guests, for sure, the conversations that she has with the guests, but also the insights that they share. Insights on many different industries. Some are in the tech industry, fashion. Some are artists. They work in the film industry. All kinds of creatives and not so creatives. There's some people in finance and all of that. So it's interesting to learn about their journey. And there are so many takeaways in every episode. It's one of my favorite podcasts. And I've had the privilege of meeting Elisa Licht. I think it was 2 years ago. She offers, I guess she creates these online seminars at times. And I was able to attend one of those. It was like a free online seminar for people who were looking, either were looking for jobs, had been recently unemployed, or want to venture into another industry. So it was a small group, and we were able to talk, ask her questions, and that, like, I was over the moon. So yeah, leave your mark.
There you go. I'm definitely going to go start listening to that, and then probably pick up the book as well, because that's always something you want to do, is leave your mark. The final question of the podcast before I allow you to promote yourself, which is something I offer all my guests, is from the game Spark by Seek Discomfort. They're a great company that gets people to look outside their comfort zone. And so the question today is, describe your greatest moment of internal discomfort.
My greatest moment of internal discomfort. Greatest moment of internal discomfort. That's a very, very good question. And that can be related to the podcast.
Anything you want.
Anything.
If you want to do it with podcasting, related to the podcast. We'll do it with podcasts. We'll do it with a podcast. Just to keep it niche, to keep you not going off into a whole place and trying to decide your whole life. But something in podcasting.
I think it was putting the podcast out there on YouTube and all the other like digital platforms, because it made it real, right? And it's one thing to record episodes, but you got to publish them and let people watch and see and dissect everything. You know, that was, to me, that was that. When I would think about it, it would make me kind of uncomfortable, because again, I like to hide behind my words, right? Yeah. So to put myself out there and like to actually publish it, to actually like create a YouTube channel, make the videos public, promote these episodes on social media, and promote like previews so people see my face, they hear my voice, you know, that was, it can be like, you know, terrifying, but you know, I overcame that. And, you know, it had to happen because the podcast had to live, right? It had to exist. So putting it out there, making it like real, I guess that was a bit uncomfortable. Yes.
We're thankful that you did it, because without your podcast, we wouldn't be able to hear your beautiful poetry and look at it in a new light. So Linsay, I'm going to jump off the screen here. I'm going to give you the chance to let my audience know where they can find you, how they can follow you, support you, and all that wonderful jazz. So the floor is yours.
All right. You can visit my YouTube channel, Alpha Female Chronicles. You can binge watch both seasons of the podcast. You can also check out my website, alphafemalechronicles.ca, because .com was not available for some reason. You can also check me out on Instagram at Linsay, Linsay_4, no D in my first name. And you'll see all the latest posts. And not just that, you can see some of the previews of episodes, of some of the poems in my book. You can purchase the Alpha Female Chronicles poetry collection on the Friesen Press website. There's also a link on my website to purchase it. You can purchase a copy or even the ebook. So you can see that on the Friesen Press website or on my website, alphafemalechronicles.ca. You can listen to my podcast on Spotify, Google, and Apple. The Alpha Female Chronicles podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Linsay, for being a guest on the show. I can't thank you enough for sharing all that amazing tips and being so vulnerable with us and sharing your show with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I had a blast.
Awesome. Love to hear that. Ladies and gentlemen, of course, my audience, you know the spiel. You can find all the links in the show notes down below. Please go support this amazing podcaster if you want to hear some vulnerabilities in the world, which I think we need a lot more of. And I'm glad we have Linsay here doing that with her Alpha Female Chronicle podcast. It's a tongue
It's a
twister.
mouthful.
It is, but it's a great podcast, and I'm looking forward to listening to some more. So remember, my audience, as always, invest in yourself.